This is Peter Palsen on site in Puerto Rico. Today I'm at Palmas del Mar, which is home to many relocating mainlanders, including crypto investors. Earlier this week, I had an opportunity to interview Giovanni Mendez, who is one of the most qualified local attorneys in the area of Act 2022-60 and crypto. And we're going to bring that interview to you right now. This is Taking Shelter. I'm your host, Peter Palsen. Good morning. Today I'm in the offices of Giovanni Mendez, who is an attorney in Puerto Rico that has Act 60 clients. And I've followed Giovanni for the last few years, spoken with him, and it's a great privilege to be here talking to you. And when I was watching your video about a few months ago, I saw that you're a collector of Star Wars memorabilia. So I brought you a present, and to set the proper background.
Thank you.
Hang on a second.
Thank you, thank you.
And this is also you.
Yeah.
Here's your daddy.
Thanks.
So we'll get that out of the way.
Yeah.
So that's great. So Giovanni, speaking of the Death Star, are you aware of any developments in the IRS Act 22 campaign?
Well, I mean, they announced publicly that they would do an increased audit campaign. So since then, I had already seen clients that had received either audits or IDRs.
Yes.
So I think, it's continued in that same pattern. So I'm aware of some, new IDRs or different IDRs people under the program have received. I think it's, again, all in line with the announced campaign and pretty much seems, sticking to what we could expect they would be inspecting as in regards to the rules and, the Treasury regulations under 937.
The past 2 years have been successful for the Act 22 program, in particular, largely due to the price of crypto going up. How is 2023 shaping up?
So I think we saw two things that happened simultaneously. One was there definitely was a crypto bull run and prices increased, and that always gets a lot of noise. But from the beginning of the pandemic, at least personally, and in this office, we kind of thought we'll have to reshape things because maybe people will not be moving. And to my surprise, it was the contrary. And I started getting calls of people that say, I'm thinking about moving anyway. So considering either Florida or, Nevada, some other state, might as well move to Puerto Rico. So yes, in part crypto, but I think it had a lot to do with the pandemic where people were just looking where to relocate to. We saw a huge surge. But 2022, we started seeing that downslide in new people coming in. And I think 2023 will follow suit. It's not that it's reducing, it's just going back to pre-pandemic levels, I would say. So still a very healthy number and steady number of people moving. But 2020 and 2021 were definitely, there was a lot more frenzy around moving for those years. And I've been able to verify that not only in my practice, but talking to government officials as well, seeing their numbers.
Well, and you mentioned crypto in 2022 went on a bit of a slide. I think the high for the year was the day one, January 1st of 2022, and then it ran down to about $16,000. Started at 47 and went down to 16. That happened back in 2018.
Yeah.
And I wonder if, given the fact that it can cost around $20,000 a year to maintain your Act 22 status, are some crypto investors getting a little bit weary of this ride?
We've seen that in both, bull bear runs and then the new cycle of bull now bear run, where what you see more is people that maybe put in an application and file, but never actually get to move because they put in the application early on, they're planning ahead, they're thinking about where it's going and just thinking up. And, by the time where they have to commit to make the move, they can't, or they bail on the move midway there. I've also seen now people that are coming up to their home, the requirement to purchase a residency in the newer decrees. And, they're being challenged with a decision on what they would want to do because they have to comply with that requirement. So yeah, it's something that we see a little bit. I don't think it's, again, huge numbers, but there are people both in crypto and equities market in general. I've had clients in the equities market that over, maybe last year lost significant amounts of money and have to reconsider the ability or the need to remain in Puerto Rico. Also, when they have to, see if they were going to move and all of a sudden they had losses, those if the losses occur in Puerto Rico, they would accrue in Puerto Rico and wouldn't be able to offset U.S. sourced revenue with those losses. So it's planning decisions that have to be made along the line of completing a move or maybe, backtracking on that.
Yeah, I did a video, came out about a week ago, that talked about the rules under U.S. tax law, section 37, the sourcing rules, and the special rule on the sale of assets you owned at the time you took up residency in Puerto Rico. And a lot of, I don't know if there's like a certain market practice. I know you don't do a lot of compliance. Do you do a lot of compliance?
No, we don't do tax filings or compliance. Yeah.
Right. So I don't know if there's a market practice on how to treat Bitcoin in the context of these U.S. rules, whether it's actively traded, whether it's a type of investment asset that you have to use this cutoff method or allocation method for.
I haven't been able to find a consensus in asking practitioners. I hear different approaches, but I think everything that has been released from the IRS is consistent with, crypto not being a currency and not being a security. There was a chief counsel advice issued earlier in January that was in regards to the deductibility of donations and how you had to get an appraisal. And the challenge was, well, we're using the exchange value. And chief counsel says, well, it's not a publicly traded security.
Yeah.
So when you see that, you see, well, if this would apply by analogy to other sectors of the code, other sections of the code, then using the methodology you would use for a marketable security doesn't seem like it is the correct approach. But again, there's no specific guidance on that portion.
Yeah, when I was doing the research for my video, it made me wonder whether crypto, and you can talk about Bitcoin and Ether, and then you can talk about the 10,000 other types of tokens that are out there, or derivatives or whatever. It made me wonder whether some or all or a significant part of those were even the type of assets that were covered under this special year of rule move. And if an asset's not covered under the special year of rule move and there's not some other special rule out there, then it seems you would not have to do any proration when you were to sell the asset after you take up residency in Puerto Rico. So if you bought a token for $10,000 and you moved to Puerto Rico and really the day after you took up residence, you sell it, it may not be subject to the proration rule.
Yeah. So again, I've seen just different approaches, and it's one of these subjects that is discussed in different ways. I think that the clearest that we could find is at least, and that proration rule is for marketable securities, and then for certain other assets, and then you have to go to another two sections to see what the assets are listed, right, and to see if it's there. I think we have enough guidance to say, well, it's not a publicly traded asset, so you at least could discard it from that one, and then you'd have to go through that other list and make an evaluation. Obviously, there's a different methodology for if it applies to that list. So that's part of what's being evaluated. I've had practitioner CPAs that say, well, it depends on, well, exchange value is one if it's actively traded in exchange, and then others look at well, what use is the taxpayer giving to the asset? So what does it represent for the taxpayer? So those are kind of the analysis that I've seen. But again, it's something that definitely lacks full clarity, mostly from the federal regulations. Locally, there isn't a regulation that explains methodologies on bifurcation. There's just the incentives code that mentions previously accrued gains. The regulations don't say how those are established. And then there was Law 52 approved last year in Puerto Rico, which what it says is it clarifies, previously accrued is from sources outside of Puerto Rico. And there's expectation, and we've had discussion as to what that means, right? Because you could think it's aiming to solve or clarify this issue, but it kind of leaves it there, right? I was expecting that they would go deeper into that, and maybe they will through a determination or regulation, because that's kind of where it starts. But again, there's no methodology. As a general practice in Puerto Rico, when we don't have something in the Puerto Rico code that addresses a specific issue, then we obviously look to federal, both Internal Revenue Code and regulations. So currently it kind of goes by, well, let's follow what it says in the 937 regs.
And that can lead you, obviously, it leads you quickly out of 937 into sections like 954, some of the marketable security sections. And this definition of marketable security, it's kind of interesting because to determine a marketable security for Bitcoin purposes, and you referred to a chief counsel advice, and then there's another one out there about like trying to take a worthless stock loss or worthless asset loss.
Yes,
and
correct.
For that purpose, it's not a marketable security under section 165, but that's not where the 937 regs go. They go to a different place in the regulations and code, which I suppose the IRS could always change. But the way it's written now, it refers to certain code sections about the behavior of the investment asset.
Yes.
And one of the code sections it refers to, interestingly, has its own definition of marketable security, which is a significantly broader definition than what you get under section 937. But they have not referenced that other rule. So you really have to get into the law.
I've done some of that back and forth. That's one of those questions that one of these impossible math questions that you want to answer. And, I've done some back and forth and some discussions. I've gotten input from other practitioners on what they understand as well. But I guess there's many things in the crypto space as well that kind of fall into this. It looks like something, it behaves like something, what treatment should it receive? But, what we've gotten consistently from the IRS so far is, well, it's definitely not a currency. So it's the personal property. And now through these chief counsel advice, we've gotten, well, it's not a publicly traded security either. And there was also an attempt in Congress to have wash sale rules apply to cryptocurrency. So, when you look at that, then you see, well, the legislator, is also aware that this isn't publicly traded security. So, how you construct case law, I would present all these and say, well, at least, we should be out of the marketable security treatment.
Yeah, I mean, in some respects, this is the leading edge of characterization of crypto for purposes of the Internal Revenue Code, or at least particular parts of the Internal Revenue Code. We're talking about 3,000 people. We're trying to make this determination for 3,000 people, and there are millions of crypto owners out there, and all the IRS is really kind of concluded is that crypto is property.
Yeah, because and for in my practice, maybe this is one of the questions that I get so frequently and sometimes don't have the most correct answer for. But in what you just said, this determination may impact about 3,000 people, but then the determination to treat crypto as a currency, say the IRS says, okay, we're going to treat it as a currency to solve this problem. It's actually a smaller problem than what it'll create US wide and worldwide, and how they would elect to treat the ramifications. And you'd have tax ramifications and potentially securities laws ramifications as well. So it's actually a smaller problem than when it seems to in my practice.
Well, and you take the case, you take the situation with staking.
Yes.
Like, what is the tax treatment of staking? And now the IRS said we're going to do some kind of analysis of that. And they took the court case, and then they backed away from the court case. They said we're not ready yet. And when you get back to the rules on like what is subject to the move allocation, special allocation rules, it really focuses on the type of income that's generated, whether that's passive income or no income. Well, arguably, I mean, I think that and this is based on some very thoughtful analysis by one person in particular, but arguably you get into the fact that you've got some tokens that create service income.
Yes.
And if it's creating service income, it is not
rents or royalties.
The type of activity. It's not interest, dividends, rents, royalties, or annuities. So you're out of those rules. Yeah.
So even before staking, that's one of the things that I looked at. But they are having this quote unquote trouble in classifying the income for staking. To me, it's the advice I give my clients. It's look, it's ordinary income, it's potentially service income, and we're working through that from a Puerto Rico perspective on making that definition and making sure that if certain parameters are complied with in a staking activity, that would be eligible income for export service.
Yes, the Act 20, the Legacy Act 20.
The Legacy Act 20, and actually because when Act 60 was incorporated, it included blockchain services through its distribution of computer programs, blockchain services, and it talks about rewards received through servicing, maintaining the blockchain. Mm-hmm. So when you look at that, you're like, well, that's what staking is doing. So we could fit staking exactly in that category. And then consistently with, staking being a form of mining and we had conversations with the Proof of Stake Alliance when the Jared case was alive. Yes. And although we had slightly different goals, we were looking to have a definition of consensus for staking, because what I've seen is there's also other products. We have staking as when we think about ETH, but then there's other products or projects that come along and call something else staking. And then that maybe created a lot of confusion and creates a lot of confusion for the authorities, because whether through a different product or through the marketing that some, let's say, CeFi platforms perform, they're advertising something else, branding it as staking, and then obviously the regulator is saying, wait, that doesn't look like a service. And then we came back to say, well, because maybe that's not staking. And what we're talking about staking, and like you mentioned, the service of maintaining this blockchain.
Well, Kraken just got a $30 million. The numbers in crypto were so big, but I think they got a $30 million penalty based on the way they were conducting their staking or lending. I think it was more lending. And then Coinbase says, oh, thank goodness we're not doing that, and we're going to be okay. So it's just so subtle.
Because I think when it came out, it like the rumblings were coming out, it was like, oh, the SEC is against staking. And there was a lot of controversy for 2 minutes around that. But when you saw the complaint and when you look into what was happening in Kraken, it was more like, well, it's not staking per se. They were doing some other activities with the tokens. And actually the SEC's complaint was, it's not even the fact that you were doing other activities, it's that it wasn't disclosed. Yeah. So it came more to a disclosure thing than, because you got news or headlines of the SEC is against staking, and the SEC came out and said, we're agnostic to technology. It's not the technology, but if you're doing something in this that's an investment, well, your customers need the disclosures. So that's something very important to clarify, right? Because maybe some people stick with the prior headline of SEC is against staking. And Kraken seems, and well, they agreed, they didn't challenge much, this complaint. So I think they saw that maybe they committed an error there.
Well, to the point you're making, and you mentioned the Jared case and the IRS pulled back from the Jared case. Do you think the next case might be in the Section 933, 937 area? How do you fully develop your Act 22 IRS campaign without getting into
because
crypto?
Well, I think in the case of staking, that's one of the cases where the IRS, their interest will be aligned with the interest of decree holders. I think the IRS, with what they came out with mining, and it's like, no, it's ordinary income. I think that's how you want to classify it for export service purposes as well, right? So you want to say, yes, and that'll be one of those cases where the IRS, maintains a big chunk of revenue and maintains a big win in leaving the classification consistent with mining in general, right? And I think that's actually the case right now. Staking is just another form of mining, so that's a big chunk of revenue. And then from a Puerto Rico perspective, I mean, sure, you could have people argue, because I've seen arguments where they say, oh, it should be a capital gain or it should be passive income, and take it from 4 to 0. I mean, I don't think you want to be that greedy, right? I think, the 4% tax under the export service is just fine. So I wouldn't see a challenge, right? I think those treatments with what's currently, stated in the law and what the interpretation of that can be, and what the current treatment of mining is, I think those lead for, favorable treatment for Puerto Rico residents.
Hey, we're trying to save some energy here. We shouldn't put ourselves in a worse tax position by trying to save the planet, right?
No. Yeah, absolutely not. And it's that understanding of what, the differences are and what the differences and similarities are.
Yeah, I think another big development as far as crypto pricing and liquidity and market pricing is the whole FTX blow up, which calls into question even though if something's got a market price, whether it's sufficiently reliable market price,
Yeah, and I think that's what, going back to you mentioned the chief counsel advice on the deductibility of the tokens. It's and the one they came out like a few days apart. The one on the deductibility of the donation. Well, if you have something that has a value but doesn't have volume, then you shouldn't be taking a tax deduction for something that you realistically couldn't sell for that amount. And on the contrary, right, you're claiming a loss, but you're actually still holding onto the tokens. And we've seen in history, in crypto history, something that's worthless all of a sudden, go in 50 or something X.
Ojalá.
Yeah, I mean it's happened. I've been in the crypto space a little bit, and I'm taking more losses than I would, including these whole bankruptcy problems that we saw last.
Well, let's talk about Sam Bankman-Fried. Here's a guy that could have obtained a tremendous amount of tax benefits under either Act 20 or both Act 20 and Act 22. Is there any indication that Sam Bankman-Fried ever considered Puerto Rico to be a base for his crypto empire?
I actually am not personally aware for FTX specifically. I'm not. There's other platforms that have had presence or are registered or have presence here. I'm not sure FTX, and maybe their rise and fall was sort of so quick that I don't know if they even got to consider it. It seems that they just built things out of where they dropped them, but
yeah. There's no indication. If you Google Sam Bankman-Fried in Puerto Rico, you end up with nothing. There's no indication that he ever thought about this. You mentioned in a video a couple months ago that Puerto Rico is not a good place for committing financial mischief, and I assume that's kind of got to do with the fact that you're really not out of the reach of the long arm of the law back in the U.S.
No, not at all, because there's a local regulator, but Puerto Rico is within the federal jurisdiction. So we have a local regulator and local laws, but these laws are preempted. The local laws are preempted by the federal laws, and the local regulator, out of their own initiative and out of collaboration, they work directly with federal regulators as well.
Right.
So we've seen, recently how there are vehicles that are operating under local law, and the regulator has taken to audit, inspect, and shut some of these down if they don't comply with their requirements. And then on top of that, you'll still have the federal regulator, and that goes from the financial entity perspective. But tying this to how we opened the conversation, not the Star Wars part, but the audits, there is an increased IRS campaign, which we've seen some activity on, but there's definitely a significantly increased local campaign where the Department of Economic Development has taken to review compliance, revoke decrees that are not in compliance. So and audit individuals. They started with the individuals and moving on to businesses. This had happened in the past, but in lower amounts. Now they've basically come out and said, we're going to audit 100% of everyone, within the next 2 years, and then we're going to continue with a yearly audit campaign of 15% of the decree holders per year.
I heard they were after Brock Pierce when he was looking at running for Senate in Vermont, and there's a residency requirement, so he was trying to straddle the line.
I saw some comments that were made public in the press, and I guess they just, what the government says is, if that happens, that's something we'll look into. We'll make sure that there's compliance. But I don't think any of these audits, I mean, they certainly shouldn't be specifically targeted. Yeah. But again, they just said, we're going to audit 100% of everyone, and then we're going to continue to do that 15% of the decree holders every year.
Yeah, and I mentioned that just as a indication that there is actually activity.
Yeah, no, we've gotten, so yeah, we've certainly been able to represent a lot of clients going through these audit processes and just, help them report and understand what's being asked.
I saw the report on the DDEC revoking, I guess that's who's revoking these contracts. Hundreds of contracts got revoked. Now, a couple of months ago on a podcast, you said that for every 4, and I think you've alluded to it here, but for every 4 people that apply for a contract, only 3 people will actually move or take advantage of that. Are these revocations just the DDEC cleaning up some unfulfilled contracts or dead wood, or is there something more aggressive going on here?
I think there's some of that'll certainly fall, because actually the DDEC, they'll send out notices, right? It's not something that just happened, they revoke your decree. They send out notices, they allow you to come into compliance, and there'll be a situation where there may be a cost to that, right? But there will be people that maybe never move. But the other bigger problem that you have, and what I tell clients is, if you're leaving, you can't just pick up and leave. You need to report to the authorities that you're surrendering this decree, because if not, they will consider you in non-compliance because you failed to report or comply. And the revocation of the decree is done from the beginning. It's declared null from the beginning. So let's say you put in 3 good years, 4, and you're planning to leave on your 5th year, you just packed up and left. You didn't file a notice with the government that you left. Well, now you'll start to accrue an annual report or compliance filings that the government is expecting from you. Yeah. You don't file those, they'll revoke your decree from the beginning. Now you owe 4 years in back taxes.
Is that what happens? I know it's a shorter time frame, but is that what happens if you don't occupy the residence? Like you don't buy and occupy a residence within 2 years? It just
so different decrees have different requirements, depends on when they were issued, and there has been more than one home purchase requirement. So I would specifically go to what's stated in the person's decree to answer a question like that. Yeah.
Okay. So there seems to be, we talked a little bit about it coming from the DDEC, coming from the IRS, U.S. politicians can sometimes speak bad about these incentives. From the business side, you've got the whole global minimum tax initiative. There just seems to be a lot of pressure pushing back against the success of these incentives. Do you think that will continue in a sense that the potential of these incentives will never be fully realized because of these pressures?
Yeah, and it's one of these things where, of course, it hangs in the balance where, enforcement and compliance could have a shilling effect, but I think it's the contrary, right? The DDEC and the local treasury as well, Hacienda, you've heard the secretary express himself as to how these are productive incentives. So this is something that they calculate and they want. But they want the good players, right? So it's part of their dual nature to promote something, but they won't promote the correct use of it, which is actually the use that will render the correct return on investment, right? So enforcement with compliance and paying dues and filing decrees, and if it's paying tax, even this 4% tax amounts to $100 million in revenue, or over $100 million in revenue for the Puerto Rico Treasury. So they want to collect that, right? Even if it's a lower rate, they still want to collect that.
Sure.
And the individual investor decree holders, they will have income that is not subject to the benefits of the decree. So they obviously, because that's the idea, is move here, get an incentive on one part of your income, but we will still capture other parts of your income that are not exempt, and some of that are captured through sales and use tax, but others are through other forms of income that the individual may have that they want to collect on.
At times, these rules can seem very complicated, and some of the reactions by authorities can seem to be somewhat combative. Against that light, what would you say to an investor who's considering taking or really moving to Puerto Rico, taking up bona fide residence, applying for these incentives? Is this a good idea, or is this just going to get
No, yeah, I think it's a good idea. I think it's but there is a set of rules from the local perspective and from the federal perspective. You've touched on some of them in your videos as we were discussing before we started this. Some people. And it's the simplest way to do it, but also you can't rush into it, right? It can be for different people quicker than for others, but you have to have considerations. You have to come in with the mentality that maybe 100% and likely 100% of your income won't be captured. So it'll be a reduction to play in the formula, but I don't think it's something that you should be concerned of you follow these rules and then you'll still run into trouble. That shouldn't be the case, and I don't think that's the message that, I'm not in the government, but I don't think that's the message that the government should portray or wants to portray. It's a message of, this is the deal, it's two-sided. That's why it's a contract here in Puerto Rico versus other jurisdictions that offer some, the USVI has a program, but they when it started, they didn't have, this decree program, which it was kind of standard. You'd have different investment requirements that would kick in there. So there wasn't a consistency necessarily. And here, what they promote is that there is a consistency. Here's your deal. Here's what you comply with. Obviously, get the right advice. There's people that try to do it yourself, or there's services that aren't necessarily qualified and are more like marketing services and just want to push you to do something and maybe aren't really being comprehensive. And that's part of what we do at times, where clients could come to me and maybe their first contact was with me, but I'll still send them back and say, well, maybe let's bring in your current CPA to this call or to this conversation, or someone new, right? You might need someone new, someone different, someone that specializes in something. And some of these other services just kind of rush and say, no. And I would say nobody should move here trying to do it yourself or not having the right assistance. That'd be one of the first things I'd say. But someone that went through all this process, I don't think they should be too concerned. And if they're really committed to being here, it could be a lot of fun. And it's a little cold outside, but overcast, but not really cold. So
beautiful country.
Yeah.
And as a kind of final question, but as a lifetime adult resident of Puerto Rico, how important are these incentive programs?
Well, I'm able to have and operate, and we're close to celebrating 5 years of having this business in particular. And it's thanks to these incentives, both in the sense of the business that we bring here and the ways that we are able to take advantage of these incentives, and sometimes tax savings for me represent, the salaries of these staff that I wouldn't be able to have here. And, I'm the oldest guy in this office. And
I think I'm the oldest guy in the office.
Well, in the payroll, I'm the oldest guy in the active payroll that's here in this office, and we have a great crew and great opportunities that we're able to have, because of these incentives, and then I see that also with my clients and a lot of the opportunities that are being able to have here. There's an injection of the economy that's economic. But there's also a huge wealth transfer that the people that have been able to take advantage of that, are flourishing on their own, and things take a change for the positive in that sense. Not that looking at the programs and seeing that they are effective, or if they need to be tweaked or fixed wherever they need to be tweaked is important as well. But I think the net, it's clear to say that the net benefit of the incentives, is here, is palpable.
Well, that is a very hopeful message. And it's don't be discouraged, but get good tax advice. And Giovanni, I don't think there's better available here than in this office. And may the force be with you.
Appreciate that.
Giovanni,
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you.